Are live again with the No Absolutes podcast and our good friend George Monty, host and pioneer of the True Life podcast, joining us from out in the wild today in Hawaii, making us all jealous. How are you doing today, George?
Living the dream, Ben. Thank you for having me today. I'm excited to be here.
Excellent, man. I'm happy to have you. We do this thing a couple times a week, and it just seems to get more and more pleasurable for me personally. So,
Yeah, I agree. I feel like every conversation we have helps me organize my thoughts, and I've been getting a lot of good feedback from people that are enjoying it. So it's a good time and it's fun and it's something that keeps my mind moving. So I enjoy doing it and looking forward to all of them.
yeah, in that, I was actually kind of thinking about that earlier today, or I think it was yesterday. I love to talk and I can sit and ramble on for forever, but actually getting to have, thought provoking conversations on the consistent, you know, level that we've been having them recently, I just noticed a difference in my own, thought processes, right? And the way that, the words travel through the mind, the concepts and the visions that you're trying to create. And gotta love it.
Yeah, I do too. I think a lot of us, we're starved for conversation in life. And in your own community, you find yourself filling out certain roles. Like maybe you're a role of a father, a role of a husband, a role of a friend, a role of a employer, a role of an employee. And so when you can seek out these conversations that help you understand a different role in your life, I think it helps you begin playing a different role in your life. And I feel like it, at least for me, it helps me to see myself from a different point of view. And I think that's where real growth can be done is when you start seeing these new vistas, when you start seeing these new qualities about yourself, you can start playing with them and you can start changing roles and shifting roles. And I think that it's really exciting and it's really fun and it's something that everybody can do.
Yeah, and it's a lost art, right? I mean,
Yeah, it is.
when we first met, we talked a little bit about Isaac Asimov's The Black Widowers Club, and that was one of the most enthralling books for me personally that I've ever read, simply because it was, it's little short story mysteries essentially. So there's not like some overarching grand tale or anything, but it was the intellectual like bombardment of the situation, right? You have all these guys come, and each week somebody brings a guest with a challenge to the group essentially, and it's a dinner party and it's a conversation more importantly than anything else, and that just wonderful intellectual aspect of conversation is something that we just don't do all that much anymore, sadly. But I'm happy that we found it a way to do it here.
Yeah, yeah, me too. It's interesting how there can be a lot of growth if you it's I always look back at my garden or I look at the environment around me, and I think so much of a relationship between people is a lot like a relationship throughout the world. And the more you feed and tend to the garden, the richer the fruit will be, or the more abundant the fruit will be. And it can be hard work sometimes. It takes a lot to, but it's really rewarding. It takes a lot to think about the conversation, and it takes a lot to really understand what someone is trying to tell you. For so long, I think in the world we live, we have been conditioned to just respond without thinking. And a lot of the times I have found myself not listening to people, but just trying to think while they're talking. And I've realized through our conversations and through podcasting and trying to become a better father and a husband that the art of listening is so important. It reminds me of mom used to say, "You got God gave you two ears and one mouth, so you can listen twice as much as you can talk."
I
And
got the
I
same
think
one.
there's a yeah, I think that there's a lot people can learn and a lot that people can. I think there's a lot of rewarding things that can happen if you're willing to get the most out of the conversation by respecting the person and listening to people and listening to yourself. So it is a lost art. You know what it kind of reminds me of? For those of us who like to read, there's always it seems like another lost art is people publishing their letters. Like if you look at Christopher Hitchens
Oh yeah.
or some of these old books of people's letters, like Alan Watts has a book of letters, and it's this compilation of letters that they wrote to their friends that you can read, and it really gives you some substance, and it really gives you a truer idea of who that person was when you read their correspondences with them. And in some ways, I think that's what podcasting is. It's like a book of letters, but updated to a series of videos.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point, because you don't see letters published anymore. Heck, nobody even writes letters anymore. I can't tell you the last one I actually sat down and wrote by hand. That would probably I would probably hurt my hand these days to write a letter. When's the last time
Yeah.
you wrote one?
Wow. I think it's been replaced by the email, the letter.
Sure. Yeah.
I've written some notes. I recently I got a good friend of mine from high school that well, two of them actually that I had got a message from him on Facebook, and one is going through some pretty traumatic times. He's kind of staring down the battle of pancreatic cancer, and so I had sent them some mushrooms, with all this talk we've been doing about understanding mortality and understanding what this thing is and the near death experience. And so I had I had written a note, sent him some mushrooms, just written him a quick little note, but it's far from a letter.
Right. It's interesting you bring up that, I had a couple of talking points that I've written down today. And one of them was, I just read this study this morning, and they took twins that were 100% genetically identical, and then they monitored them over a long period of their entire lives. They found that when they developed cancers, only 10% of the twins developed the same type of cancer, which is fascinating, because that suggests that most of the cancers that we're seeing in the world are, which I always suspected, but are driven via environmental factors. Because genetically speaking, they're identical. So the only thing that can be different in that situation would be those environmental factors. And yeah, so you brought up the cancer thing, and that kind of that checked that off for me. But I think back to the conversation and the writing of letters, the art of communication, if you will, which I just faux pas by bringing in a written comment over here. It's fascinating to me that podcasting did kind of evolve to be the modern form of interpersonal communication, and it's still doing so. But in that, it provides such valuable insight to other people potentially. Which I was kind of curious, in that vein of things, when did you start the True Live podcast, and what was that kind of thought process? How'd you get there?
Well, it's a really good question, and thank you for asking. I came to a point in my life about 3 years ago. It was I think it was sort of at the beginning of COVID. When COVID hit, it was unlike anything I had ever seen in my life. And not so much the idea of a deadly disease, but the idea of a fundamental shift happening in the world. And that's what I think of when I think of COVID, because it was this introduction of lockdowns, and for me, it just blew my mind, because I didn't see it as so much as a pandemic as it was a radical shift in behavior of the planet, and that spoke to me. It spoke to me in a way that was it spoke to me the same way that the voice on a 15 mushroom gram trip speaks to you. It's like, like it was the voice of God, but not so much in words. And it, like,
Sure.
I immediately took as much time off as I could. I went to my work, and I filed for FMLA, and I go, I don't know what this is, but I have never seen this in my life. I need to take some time to figure things out. And there was just so much novelty that was happening at that time. And so for the first 2 weeks, I was in a haze. And I'm like, I don't understand this. Like, what does this mean? What do you mean people are going to work from home? People are shutting down. What's going to happen to the government? Like, there was just so much going through my mind, so many crazy questions. And so for the first 2 weeks, I thought about the world. And then the first, after the first week, it was all the government, the world, my life, work. And then the second week was my family. What does this mean for my daughter's school? What does this mean for my relationship with my wife? What does this mean for my economic status in the world? What does this mean? And then the third week was, what the fuck am I doing with my life? And it's like COVID finally gave me a chance to see myself alone and see myself outside of the matrix, if that makes sense. Because up until that point, my life was like this. I'll give you an example of how my daily structure was prior to COVID. It's wake up at like 4:45, go downstairs, make breakfast. A little bit of fruit, some oatmeal, make it for me, my wife, and my daughter, make some coffee. Wake up my daughter at 5:30. She's got to be ready by 6. We leave the house at 6:15, 6:30. Sit in an hour and a half of traffic. Drop her off at school. Sit in another hour of traffic. Drive to work. Work from like 9 o'clock until 10 o'clock. Come home. My wife and my daughter are sleeping. Get up at 4:30 and do it all again. That was me. My wife, on the other hand, she would leave the house at 6:30, 6:15. She would sit in an hour and a half of traffic. She would work all day, try to leave town by 4 so she could pick up my daughter by 5:30 at school. Then she would sit in traffic from 5:30 to 7:30, just bumper to bumper traffic, get home, try to get something to eat, do homework, take a shower, put the kid to bed. And we were somewhat miserable because we didn't see each other. We were doing okay on money, but like you know, all our money was going into all these things that was trying to keep this machine alive, and we didn't even see each other. And it was like on Saturdays we'd sit down and like try to have a conversation about stuff, and both of us were pretty irritable, and like it just wasn't working. It was something that we were forcing down, and we would tell ourselves stuff like, "Look, we just got to get our daughter through school. Look, we got to knock this out for another 7 or 8 years." And it was such this struggle, and it wasn't. It just seemed like it wasn't worth the candle. And so that was prior to COVID. And so when I took this time off, all of a sudden I had time to think. I had time to figure out, okay, my wife's going to work from home. This is a little better. And even though I don't know what's happening, COVID has been a boom for me. And like I'm at home now. And the time I took off it was around like 3.5 months. And I have never taken that much time off in my life. And so the first week I was thinking about the government, the situation. The second week was my family. The third week was me. And by the fourth week, I thought to myself, I do not ever want to go back to the way of life I was living. I can't do it. Like I was dying inside. And so about the fifth week, I thought to myself, okay, if I don't want to go back to that way I was living, I need to start something. And if I go back to the way I was living, it's on me. I have this rare time off where I have a few months where I can start something and I can begin something. I may not get it to where I want, but I can begin to change my life right now. And that little seed that was in me began to grow, and I began to think good thoughts about it, and I began to explore in my mind what is possible, what is not possible. And that's where the True Life podcast was born. It was like, if I go back to the way I was living, then I have accepted that as my fate. I must do something more. And it can be something small, but I must have a goal. I must have a better life in mind. Otherwise, I'm going to continue to do it. And I credit COVID, and I credit the crazy, uncertain conditions that were brought into my life because it forced me to take a good, hard look at what I was doing. And then it forced me to take a look at some solutions. And I started off the True Life podcast as a YouTube channel, just making, talking to myself and just coming out and maybe walking on the beach. And just, it was almost as if it was a sort of blog slash journal where I talked about things in my life that I thought were important. And as I began to explore that area, you know, I began talking about language, magnets, and I can't tell you how many people just laughed at me and were like, "Dude, what are you doing? What are you doing, George? Like, no one wants to hear you talk about that, you knucklehead." And but it never got me to the point where I wanted to quit. I knew inside, like I was doing it for a bigger reason. I was doing it because I wanted to change my life, and I enjoyed it, and I knew deep down I was good at it. Like I have so many cool friends that are like, you know what, George, I love talking to you, and I go, you know what, I love talking to you too. And I thought, what a great way. There's got to be other people out there that might not like that might like talking to me, and even if they don't, I bet you I can find some people that I like to talk to, and that's really rewarding for me. And so the podcast turned into, or the YouTube channel was just a YouTube channel for like a year, and then I figured out like, oh, maybe I can do this podcasting thing. So I went online and I started looking at hosts, and I started understanding that I've been listening to podcasts for years, and I've been listening to audiobooks for years, and I finally felt like I was filled up enough with good information that I could start helping other people. And so that's where the podcast was born from, man. So I hope that, I don't know, it's kind of a way around answer, but yeah.
That's a wonderful origin story. I love it.
Thank
That
you.
was fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think COVID did that for a lot of people. I think it was pretty much an unprecedented thing, right? We never
Yeah.
seen the world just decide to close up shop, like
Yeah.
and forcibly. It wasn't like voluntarily close up shop. It's like, nope, we're closing it down. Like, I didn't choose to close it down, but okay, right? Yeah, and I think that was a big reality check for a lot of people. From my perspective, I'd been seeing the stresses in the system in for many years, and I knew it was going to be coming to a head. And it was just a matter of time before there was some sort of global event that kind of kicked it off. It just so happens that it was COVID, and it was, and since then, it's been a lot easier to have conversations with people, because before, especially, talking about no absolutes and talking about,
Right.
things, systems and scale and, how they break and fail. You couldn't, people would be like, oh, yeah, yeah, that's nice. The United States has been around for 250 years. It's not going anywhere. Right. Or, this institution's been here. This company's been here. They're not going anywhere. Nothing's going to change. But now people realize that change is inevitable. And so it's a lot easier to have these conversations. And I think it's an important time in human history, too.
Yeah, I think, when when everything's 2020 in hindsight. However, I think that if I can already look back, and you can already look back on COVID and see it as an agent of change, I think that in 10 and 20 and 30 years, we're going to see this event, this lockdown, this worldwide phenomenon as the beginning of the new world that was born.
I
And
agree.
it's so interesting. Yeah, like it's so interesting to me, whether you believe in a new world order, or you believe in the end of nation states, or you believe in the George Bush's idea of a new world order where the world is changing and it's going to be privatized. Like all of these things are happening, and I don't think that any one person no, has control of the narrative anymore. And in a way, I see that as growth. I see that,
Opportunity.
it, yeah, huge opportunity, huge opportunity. There's, if you just take a moment to see the world changing right now, then I think you will notice those same changes taking place in yourself, and you will understand what you can do to become the person you've always wanted to become. Because I think that is kind of what's happening right now. I think that there is this sort of, I was going to say freedom, but I think it's more of a liberation. I think the human spirit is being liberated right now, and that the old ways of containing the human spirit are no longer working. It's almost like we've been held in this prison. We've been held prison by narrative. We've been held prison by monetary institutions. We've been held prison by limited ideas. And these, because the world is changing so fast, limiting beliefs are quickly being obliterated. And I think that that is one of the messages that the world is trying to teach the individual, even though the individual is part of the world. You know, you can look at the world and you can see governments, nation states, ideas of nuclear war, monetary systems. All these things are boom, they're being exploded right now. And the same way that an engine runs through a boom and a bust, the same way the theorized Big Bang blew up, so too are you as an individual going through an explosion of creativity right now. This is the best time in the history of my life, and maybe in written history, that we have to expand ourselves, expand our consciousness, and really become the very thing that you've always wanted to be. And I've been hearing this in the lexicon. I heard a guy yesterday that he came out on this podcast, and it's a younger kid. I think it's Tommy Kerrigan, I think is his name, and he's got a lot of issues, but he came out on his podcast. And he goes, you know what? This is the first time since my brother died that I feel like I'm becoming the person I'm supposed to become. And the reason I grabbed onto that is because I had said that in my own mind. Like, I feel like I'm finally becoming the person who I'm supposed to be. And if I feel that and other people are feeling that, like, that is more of a virus than COVID. And I hope that's a virus that catches on, because I think that now is the time.
Well, I think the seeds for this were planted a long time ago.
Yeah.
I think as soon as we had the advent of the internet, as soon as we had the
Yeah.
ability to start communicating, as soon as message boards started to pop up, fast forward to now, we're podcasting, 1,600 miles apart. We're sharing ideas in real time. The power of that and the value of that is so underrated. It's so misunderstood too.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I think we're seeing the consequences of that. That is really propelling all of this revelations when it comes to the way that we used to do things. How these systems have been running, who's been running them. And a lot of this, as we continue to, barrel down this path, less and less people are being fooled, it seems to me, by the veneer of it all.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And I think like I think that, what we have in our own little network, like we have begun to influence a few people, and we have begun to build our own network. And I've never met you face to face. I've never given you a hug. I've never shaken your hand,
I'd love to.
but I have. Yeah, absolutely. But I feel a level of friendship with you and some other people in our network that I feel with my close friends. It's like we have these conversations, but more than that, we have created a network that would have only been possible for people in country clubs in
Right.
really rich areas. And here we are doing it, 1,600 miles away from two different states, never meeting each other, but finding someone who can identify the same path that you're on, or even show you a different way around obstacles. And I think that that is the liberation factor. It's like the
Sure.
great equalizer is that, hey, now we have the same opportunities that were only afforded to people from wealthy families, from generational wealth. And
Mhm.
guess what? We can do it better than them. We don't need all those perks. We don't need all those hands up. Like, it's the way a wild rose grows in the desert. It's the most beautiful thing you've ever seen, and yet you have people that were going through tulip mania, that were trying to fix
Hmm.
everything and build these tulips, but they didn't know it was just a virus that made that thing beautiful. So in some ways, I think that we are that desert rose. We are the virus that cracks the tulips that makes them beautiful.
Absolutely. And I think, and without the ability to have these conversations, without the breadth of
Right?
knowledge to be able to you know, go and read scientific publications every single
Yeah.
day, right? That's been part of my life for the past 15 years. Is my first morning routine is I wake up, get my cup of coffee, and then I'm reading research papers.
Right.
Like, that's just how I start my day for the past 15 years. Just to have access to that the breadth of knowledge there, and it's
Yeah.
especially when you start getting into things like preprints and stuff like that. Now you can actually, you get past the peer review process, and you start to get these gems of experimentation, of ideas, hypotheses, and then we get to bring that to a conversation. To your
Yeah.
point, you would have to have such a massive network of money and infrastructure to support that, even 100 years ago. And so there was just a small select group of people who were ever even afforded that opportunity, right?
Yeah.
And now just look how much it's magnified. I mean, now on the same token, right? Uh, Probably 95% of people out there are just scrolling through, TikToks and Reels and all this other stuff. So, there's give and takes, of course, but I think you can't uh, stuff your nose at the opportunity, right?
Yeah. And I think it was Yogi Berra who said predictions are difficult, especially predictions about the future.
Mm-hmm.
However, I think that there will there will always be people scrolling, doom scrolling, and living vicariously through other people. And the truth is, if we're honest with ourselves, at least me, like I used to be one of those people that consumed everything. And I think on some level, you consume until you figure out a way to produce. But ultimately, consumption should lead to production. The same way that feeding your garden will lead to fruits if you do it the right way, so too will consuming lead to production. It's maybe the way we're consuming now is more of the way we're going to be seeing education. Because if you can think of education as consuming, you go to school, you're fed this diet of history, you're fed this diet of mathematics, and the hope is that you will come out and be a good worker. And I think that maybe if I can beat on this drum of as above so below, what you're seeing on the planet is a move from a vegetative stage to a fruiting stage. The same way that if you grow weed, you see it go through this vegetation stage and then it begins to bud. If you grow mushrooms, you see the mycelium taking over the soil, and then one day here comes the fruits. But the process of the mycelium growing is a long one, and it can get contaminated. And if you're not on it, if you're not watching it, the fruits are not going to come. And I think what's been happening on this planet, in your community, in your life, in your family, has been this vegetative stage. And think about the way we use vegetable. Like some people that get in a coma are a vegetable. They don't look like they're doing anything. Some people that sit in front of a television are a couch potato. They're like a vegetable, but really they're taking everything in. And so if we as individuals are really just part of this grand organism, those of us that are beginning to produce are becoming the fruits. Maybe the people in the past that were producing were like the first fruits that came out, and they some of them were sweet, some of them were sour because they were too early, but now comes the harvest season. Now comes us as the fruits of the planet beginning to produce abundance for everybody. And I think that that is what's happening. And there's this thin veneer of doom being wiped over everything. Oh, we're going to nuclear war. We're all going to die. It's these people. It's the black people. It's the white people. No, it's the Mexican people. No, you know what? Gay, straight. Like, this is like this last little casing layer that we're about to push through. And it's these people that have held on. Like, okay, look at it from our angle. We're on the bottom. And all of a sudden, you and I are talking 16 months. We're producing podcasts. We're creating content. We're enjoying it. We're not making any money from it, but we are making the world a little bit better. And I know that because people reach out to me and say, thank you. And that is something that is very scary. If you were the person on the top, all of a sudden, look at these people on the bottom that are just doing everything. They're not even making any money, and they keep doing it. Why are they doing it? Like that's something you can't stop. This groundswell of growth from the bottom is very scary to people who are on the top that hold all the gates together. So I think that that's part of why you're seeing this negative outgrowth is from a manifestation of people who are scared.
It was a wonderful analogy. I
Thank
love it.
you. Thank
I
you.
love it. Yeah, I think I think, you know, it's just like a wounded animal cornered is always at its most fiercest, right?
Yeah,
And I think we're
yeah,
seeing that. I think we're seeing the wounded animal cornered in the corner with the billions of people surrounding it going, I don't know anymore. And,
yeah,
and this is that,
yeah.
and now all of a sudden nuclear war, when we haven't said the word nuclear war in the past 30 years or 35, 40 years even, you know, I mean, it is interesting. I think we are seeing kind of the death throes of the ruling class, if you will. Um,
Yeah,
because now all of a sudden, in order to rule or lead in the modern parlance, you know, you have to have certain requirements.
yeah,
In those, you know, in a lot, and now more so, a lot of those requirements are being more surrounded by authenticity, transparency,
yes,
and you know, you're not being weighed upon your associations and your appeals to authority. You're being weighed upon your ideas and your merit and what you bring to a conversation, what you bring to the table. And I hurrah for humanity if that, you know, we keep
yeah,
down that path. I think.
yeah. I agree. You know, because I've been podcasting for about 3 years, and I keep breaking through different barriers, you know, and seeing, and every time I meet new people or have a conversation, or I partner with a PR firm, I'm so blown away at the way in which things work. You know, on some level, you know, I've gotten to talk to people that have bigger podcasts that make like lots of money, or I can watch some other ones now, or I listen to their interviews and I listen to the way they do it. And it's, you know, I think it's Whitney Cummings who has she
Hmm.
started a podcast and it debuted at like number 4. And
Right.
I listened to her she was on, I think she was on the Rogan podcast, and she was talking about, you know, so I go on and then I have my producers help me tell the story, and then we market it, and like, you know, we spend like, I don't know, maybe it starts like a $20,000 startup, and like I'm over here laughing like, no wonder you debuted at number 5. You're
Yeah.
dropping 20 grand. You have people professionally edited. You have someone come up with your story for you. Like, you don't do anything. You just go
Right.
out there and read off a card. Like, and the only way, and that has been the method to debuting, whether you're an artist,
Right.
painter, whether you're a podcaster, whether you're a TV star, whether you're a
Music.
movie, no matter what, it has, those are the gatekeepers, is having the connections and the money to be the person who gets the attention, and that is going away because, like, look at entertainment, like, it's Hollywood is done,
Oh
you
yeah.
know, all these things are done, like, because they don't work, no one wants to listen to them. It got to a point where the only people in positions of authority or that had the microphone were people that don't deserve it.
Right.
And so you come back to people like us, like, and there's probably a million people that are a million times better than me, but they have the same mindset of like, I don't even need money to do it. In fact, I I would love to make this my daily and get paid for it. But you know what? Even if I don't, I'm never quitting, and I'm gonna get better and better and better. And I'm meeting more and more people, and I'm growing my own network. And dude, you can ban me, you can do whatever you want. I'm never gonna stop, and my content's gonna always get better because I want people listening to this to feel great about themselves. I want them to see what I see. I want them to see who they are. And I want them to understand that they are moving into a world that is better because they're going to be better. And like, I think with a message like that, it's not only attractive, but it is intoxicating, and it is
Sure.
something that can go viral. And I want to spread that to everybody. And I want everyone to feel some joy because I think we've been held down for too long. And I, I want everybody to know this too. If you're listening to this right now, take a moment to find out what you really want in your life and just begin it. Take that first step, whether it's a podcast, whether it's becoming an artist in painting, whether it's becoming a singer, whatever it was that you felt joy, the last time you felt joy, pursue that. And I promise you, the world will start to open up to you in a way you didn't even know was possible.
Oh, you heard it from George Monty, folks.
Start it. Do it.
Indeed. No, that's wonderful. You know, when you mentioned the Hollywood, how they're just kind of out. Yeah, I've had this conversation quite a few times over recent years. You know, there's no new ideas coming out of Hollywood, right? Like everything's
Right.
a rehash or a reboot or whatever. And then when But something else popped in my head when you were talking, and I think I've realized that there's another variable in that equation that I hadn't factored
Okay.
in yet, and I think that is exactly what you just said. We don't need $20,000 in a production crew to go off and start something. So now all the people whose ideas would get stolen along the way, who were trying to be a part of that process,
Right.
those are where all the good movies, all the novel ideas, all of that came from. Now they realize there is a different path in life. And so
Right.
why should I go be beholden to these chumps who are going to steal everything from me, or when I can do it myself? And I think
Yeah.
that's a strong variable into why we're seeing this kind of disintegration of mainstream media.
Yeah. Yeah. You're seeing the okay. And now let's also factor in this idea. What happens to those institutions that had all the cameramen? What happens to those giant Hollywood sets? What happens to these giant behemoths when you know when the top media person is two guys versus it being a large conglomeration of 10 businesses that has 3,000 employees, CNN versus the top podcaster. It's all of a sudden this giant machine has become irrelevant. This giant
Right.
machine is obsolete. This idea of planned obsolescence has finally gotten so deep that it's made the people that set up planned obsolescence
Obsolete.
obsolescent.
Yeah. No, I like that. From a systems guy's perspective.
Yes.
When we're talking efficiency in the system, right? What's more efficient? Two dudes who have to bounce a couple ideas off of each other, or a boardroom plus a C-suite executive staff plus all of their supporting VPs that all have to come up with ideas in an agreement? Well, I mean, it doesn't take rocket science to figure that one out. And I think, we're ending up in a situation because of the advent of technology where now the
Yeah.
common individual has gained some. I wouldn't call it equal ground, because it's certainly not equal ground,
Right.
right? Whitney
Right.
Cummings can go debut at number 4. We're never going to debut at
Right.
number 4. But we've gained ground in that game where we can actually now, and eventually, there's the magic thing. If one thing goes viral, all of a sudden, if that 1 minute clip of you making that beautiful analogy goes viral after I send it to my network, now all of a
Yeah.
sudden you have a voice. Now all of a sudden you gain so much ground, except the ground you gained is all yours. You're not beholden to somebody else. You don't owe allegiances to other people. And I think that's why you're seeing like your Joe Rogan's just kind of taking over the marketplace.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. And Whitney Cummings, if you're listening to this, you should come on my podcast, love. You're a beautiful person.
Oh, I
I'm not
love her.
trying to
She's
say that.
she's a wonderful
Yeah.
comic too. I love her comedy. Yeah.
Yeah. I agree. You were the first person I thought of when I thought about that, and it's actually been an inspiration to me to see. Hey, I can perform at the same level as somebody that's world famous. So, but here's another aspect I was thinking of too. Let's take a look at the world of interest rates and the Federal Reserve and the current legacy monetary system. In my mind, you're getting all this information. Like if you listen to the pundits on Wall Street, like, everyone's freaking out. Like, oh man, and one of the complaints I hear all the time is that you know we can't allow wages to rise any higher because that is a huge problem. And when I think to myself, like, why can't you let wages rise any higher? It's like, on some level, we've all been put on this subsistence amount of money. And once you start allowing, I think the argument is something like when wages for employees rise higher, that means the cost of goods go higher because so much discretionary money is being spent. And so when your wages begin to rise higher, you become ripe for, hyperinflation. And I guess that if you really map that out, I can understand how they come up with that particular model. However, it seems to me that it's a very precious and narrow view of the economy. But if you were born in a world where you went to Georgetown to become the Federal Reserve, and you went to this certain school, and these bankers, like that's a shared view that you have. And when you're at that level, regardless of what profession you're in, you have a narrow view. You have tunnel vision. You're not able to see anything outside your purview because you have people on all sides of you that come around you. And when I think about the Fed and I think about wages and interest rates, let me give you a labor perspective, at least in my opinion. You know, I see all these zombie corporations. And by zombie corporations, I mean companies that don't turn a profit but are allowed to borrow money from the Federal Reserve and then buy their own stock back at a discount. And or get a loan from the Fed, park it at the Fed and make interest off it and then pay themselves. Like that is the ultimate form of socialism that I have ever seen. These very same people that rail against socialism, these very same people that rail against communism, they they are in fact right smack dab in the middle of it. And I don't. It's troublesome to me, but it's also very funny to see these lords of finance desperately trying to cling on to this idea of giving themselves money and coming up with these weird sort of ways to move money around and keep them and their families and their friends as millionaires without ever doing anything. It's so like how as someone who has a fucking degree in finance, this goes out to everybody in finance, everybody on Wall Street, Jerome Powell, this is for you, and every banker around the fucking world. If you don't do anything, if you don't fucking make a product or a service and you have to borrow fucking money to buy your own shit back, you deserve to fail. You're not too big to fail. You deserve to fail. And the fact that you don't have the balls to fucking say you're failing, this is what happens. This is exactly what happens to people who don't have the balls to look themselves in the mirror and say, my company sucks. I don't deserve to be here. I'm going to be better. They have failed to reinvent themselves. They have failed to be honest with themselves. And they are, if they're not careful, if these people are not careful, this is how people get rounded up. I don't ever condone violence. I don't condone
That's how
anything.
people get around.
But this is exactly how bankers get rounded up. Like,
Yep.
hey, fuckheads. Hey, you big dummies. What are you doing? Stop. Just stop paying yourself. Stop parking $500 million a day to your friend's bank. Just stop it. Just knock it off. There's a good chance you're going to walk away with all your millions and live. But just stop right now. Stop prepping up the zombie corporation. Like, Jerome Powell, what are you doing? Stop giving money to all the fucking companies around the world that don't do anything. Let them fail. There's actually a process for that. They can go to the fucking
But
discount window or whatever that window's called and fail.
but here's the thing. You have to realize that if you bail them out and all this stuff, you get Nobel Peace Prize or Nobel awards for economics.
I saw that.
Yeah, I was
I
like,
saw
they
that.
gave it to who? You gave it to Bernanke, who basically put in all of the terrible policies that led to the financial collapse of 2027, 28, and who allowed all these subprime mortgages and all this other bullshit to happen. And then you go ahead and say this is the greatest mind in economics in our generation. No. I'm sorry.
Well,
I'm sorry.
it begs the question, like, did was this the plan? Because if this was the
Well,
plan, then that's the guy that did it. You know what I mean?
so I mean,
No, but
if
yeah,
you, well, if you look at it like that, I mean, are you familiar with Jekyll Island?
of course, of
Okay.
course. Maybe you could fill in some people that might not be.
Well, I'll butcher it, but I'll do the short butcher anyway. Basically, Jekyll Island was a meeting of some of the wealthiest people in the country, and it was essentially the establishment of the Fed before it was actually the Fed. And then it was kind of it was a plan to get the Fed kind of as the central bank of the country. Um, that's my take on it. You got any further
Yeah,
elucidations for it?
yeah. They had to meet in secret,
Right.
and they got you know, it was 100% looked down upon by not only the population but almost everybody in Congress. It was essentially a hostile takeover of the monetary system behind closed doors,
Right.
and they paid off enough people to let it happen, and it did. And we have been in debt. We have been, and if we play that out, like that's probably the long-term solution of the central banks is to hollow out the very government, the very continent that they are presenting themselves to be the arbiters of. It's a big giant parasite, and
It
they
is.
they attach themselves and they suck everything out. And it's what I think it's what Andrew Jackson was warning about. And
Sure.
it's not something that ever works. I mean, if you look at history, these people enrich themselves by standing on the necks of the very people they claim to be protecting.
Right, but I wouldn't say it doesn't work. I mean,
That's a great point.
it's been pretty damn effective
Yeah,
in many instances. But when
yeah,
it fails spectacularly.
yeah, and that's, I mean, like you said, they're not, the people aren't dumb. I mean, if you can convince yourself that you're better than everybody, you're smarter than everybody, or this amount of money is worth it because I will set up my family for the next 10 generations. And shit, everybody's got a price. I I could see people, just look in your community, man. Like, go to the country club. It's the most exquisite country club in your state. Like, it's the same thing, man. People get together and they find ways to, the same way you and I get together and try to find a way to make the world better. Other people try to get together and find a way to steal as much as they can. And I don't know. I'm no angel, and I've made plenty of mistakes in my life, but I can't live with myself if I know I'm going to steal from someone that is equal to me or lesser than me, or just stealing in general. It fucking leaves a bad taste in my mouth. I didn't earn that. It's not mine. And sometimes I wish I could. I wish I could be a thief and steal everybody's shit and not have to work, but I can't do that. Like
Right.
my mom would fly out here and punch me in the face, and I would never want my kid to do it. And I don't care how much money you have or how many cars you have or whatever. You didn't earn that. It's not yours. Fucking, you don't deserve it. That's kind of how I see it, man.
Unfortunately, there's not some cosmic scale that weighs this thing. At least
There
not
might be.
not that we have purview to. You know,
Right.
uh, though at the same time, we do kind of see these things come around full circle. I think the problem is that we are so short lived that
Yeah.
sometimes that short circle is generational, right? It's multi
Yeah. Yeah.
generations for these things to come back around. But I think if we were to kind of look at history, even that history recorded by the winners, it really depicts this kind of scenario. You get like a Nero eventually in Rome, right?
Yeah. 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 You get rotten fruit. I mean, like let's go back to our idea of gardening or farming. If you don't tend to the soil, your crop is going to be ruined. And like that's why people bring in fertilizer. That's why, if you look at some of the sustainable cropping people do today, they're growing crops all year, but they're not monocropping. And that's kind of what long-term generational wealth is sort of like a monocrop. Like it
Sure.
works
Yeah.
really well until it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it
Until the
doesn't,
land's barren.
no, yeah, exactly. And you know, like I have a difficult time with it because I see this thing. I've been noticing this idea of generational wealth in my life, and I don't know why. Like I've been stuck on this lately, but I have, and I've been seeing people in my community. Like right now in Hawaii, Hawaii is a very good barometer of what's happening in the world, and there's we're going through this sort of cleansing right here in Hawaii. Like we've had our police commissioner, uh, him and his wife were just sent to prison for life for all the abuses and bribes they were taking. In conjunction with that, there's another guy that was his. There's another gentleman who was in charge of like he was like the secretary of environment in the state of Hawaii, and it turned out like this guy was just taking all the public money and he'd come out and say, okay, I'm gonna put these filters on the mountain up here in the sewage, and these filters are gonna be like a couple $100,000 a piece, but they're gonna go on all this particular infrastructure and it's gonna save all the sewage. Well, he just pocketed all that money and let the raw sewage flow right into the ocean. And then he funded his daughter's company for sustainable development, and he funded all his son's businesses, and he's going around the islands and handing paper bags of money to people, and like you know, like I know where that guy lives, man. I gotta drive by that fucker's house every day, and like it just I don't understand. and I've had multiple conversations. Like all that guy's neighbors hate him, you know. And
Sure.
that's where I begin. That's where I begin to see things a little bit different. Like I'm so disgusted by him, but you know what? When I see his kids, I feel so bad for them. I'm like,
Yeah.
God damn it! I bet you his kids are probably contemplating suicide. Like, what would that be like? Like on some level, you know, I gotta think that that person has to see his kids every day. That guy's wife has to see people every day. And they have to either deal with the fake friendship or they have to deal with the real, true idea that you stole from everybody and the environment to enrich yourself and you weren't apologetic about it, you don't care about it. And you know what, I can almost see in a way if you took that money and you did something with it that was beautiful. If you took that money and you started building parks, if you took that money and you started funding research to help veterans with no legs, like if you stole from one and you put it into something and at least you tried to make something better, I could get that. I wouldn't agree with it. I'd still be upset, but I can understand it. But this person just took all the money for themselves and fucking Scrooge McDucked it. You know what I mean? Just put it in a big tank and swam around in it. And so for me, like I find myself on this journey of like, there's times where I question, like, God, it looks like life's pretty good for that guy, even though he's on house arrest, even though he committed all these crimes. He's got a fleet of cars. He's got he sits at home all day. He's always traveling the world. It doesn't really seem like the consequences for him have been worth the crime that he committed. Now that
Sure.
where I've gotten there is like I don't know all the things that are happening. I don't see the problems his kids have. I don't see the love or the disgust that his wife probably has for him. I don't thoroughly know how much his neighbors hate him. I don't know how many how he can live with himself after all the dolphins and fish and environment he's killed. And I don't have to. I can sleep at night, and but it is. I can't lie and say that there's a strange question that I would love to ask him, and that question is it worth it? Maybe it is. Maybe it was for him. I don't know,
Well, that's
but
the
I
thing.
don't understand that.
That's the thing. I
Yeah,
think. I think if you were to grab, just say, a dozen of those people and ask them if it's worth it, I think you're probably going to get at least half of them to say yes.
yeah, yeah,
And I could go pretty deep on why I think that is, but at the end of the day, after you become morally bankrupt, after you choose to compromise yourself, right? After you choose to
yeah,
compromise your position as a human being on this planet, uh, something vanishes from life. But it doesn't necessarily mean that life becomes unbearable. In my experience
yeah,
of people who have
yeah,
similar people, it usually means that their actions become unbearable to those around them because they're hiding up this piece that's missing in their life that they couldn't even articulate, even if even when you ask them that question, was it worth it? They don't even understand that they lost that piece of themselves, and that's why they're doing these things. So for them it is worth it because
yeah,
instead of focusing on the greater good, instead of focusing on humanity, instead of focusing even on family, it's all about self-gratitude. Then it becomes drug habits, then it becomes jet setting to all these crazy parties, and then it becomes you know it chips away until eventually, like this guy, you said his crimes, the consequences don't seem to really weigh up to him. Well, that's what happens when you have that kind of money. It's rules for thee and not for me. And so on another level, is it worth it? Right? Like for him, he could be like, I still get to go fly around and have parties with my friends. I'm not losing anything in my life. Yeah, I'm not going to be in the public sphere anymore, but that was a lot of work anyway. Right? Yeah, and it's sad. And I think, unfortunately, it's probably more common than we think.
yeah,
And you
yeah,
would like to think that these guys have some sort of big glaring hole in their soul or whatever, but at the end of the day, I've been around quite a few of those people who seem to sleep just fine at night. Now they might need two Ambien to do it, but to each their own, I suppose.
yeah. That's a really beautiful way to put it. I never thought about them losing a piece of themselves. And, it's that piece, whether it's whether it's the tranquil peace you find throughout your day,
It's
or it's
joy,
literally a
really.
piece of your soul.
I,
It's
I,
joy.
I think, and it's not just joy. I mean, it's what gives us joy. And I think that piece, they never feel joy. I don't think you get to feel joy after you become morally bankrupt. I think that's reserved for the morally enriched.
Yeah, yeah, and you could argue that that is the real wealth, when you can find joy in a smile,
Mm.
when you can talk to a kid and tell them a joke. Like, there's joy right there, and maybe that's what drives those people to become so callous, is that they're dying of thirst, like they can't quench this mission for joy, and so they try to find it by stealing. They try to hope they can steal it from someone who has it, and
It,
maybe that's what it is. I mean,
it
that's
could be a part of it. It wouldn't surprise me at all because
yeah,
especially I bet if you were to look at some of these people too, their upbringings were you know
right,
probably tragic. You don't get a lot of you don't if you have good parents who even if they're divorced, even if you have a
yeah,
step parent, whatever, if as long as you have some sort of good aligned morality in your life from a parental figure or an authoritative figure, you know I think when you get to an adulthood, the idea that I'm going to go steal from somebody, it elicits exactly what you said. It just makes you completely uncomfortable. You don't want to do it. It's something that it doesn't even really cross your mind 9 times out of 10, right? But when it does, it makes you feel like. But if you have a tragic childhood and you're broken, you've been exposed to lying, cheating, deceit, all of these things at such a young age, it almost becomes institutionalized.
yeah. That's a great point. And I didn't think about it until you just said that now, but these people that have stolen and taken so much to enrich themselves, not only are they morally bankrupt, but they're stealing from their own kids, who maybe don't get to learn another way, and maybe it's almost like blinding them, or handicapping them by putting them in situations where they can only have people, like the people whom they're around the most, the parents, teach them that joy is not found in the smile, joy is not found in the sunset, it's found in $1 million, and only then it's fleeting. So you must make more, and you can only feel good when you're telling other people how much better you are than them.
And it's not even a verbal teaching, it's just the actions
Yeah,
of the person.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah, it blows my mind to think about it. And, in some ways, when I think about consequences, let me know what you think about this. I look at the justice system we have, and I think you're 100% right in the idea that there's rules for thee, but not for me, and that there's a definite tiered system of justice. You know, when I was growing up in middle school, we read like the Scarlet Letter and these things, and they were thought provoking books, but I remember them having a negative connotation of, like, you shouldn't do this. But the more that I think about it, like, public shaming might be a better way to reprimand people than locking them up in prison. Public shaming, like, hey, maybe this person should wear a big T all the time for thief. You know what I mean? Because you can't escape that. You can't just, it doesn't matter how, you know what, you can keep all your money, you can keep all your ill-gotten gains, but you're going to wear this letter that you're a thief, and everyone around will know forever. Like, that seems to me to be a better way. And I don't know what that means about me. I mean,
Well,
why is public shaming not used more often?
uh, because of our litigious legal system. It would be my guess. I mean, if you think about it now, all of a sudden, if a paper comes out and starts publishing stuff, it's libel. And there's all of these defamation of character lawsuits that have happened recently. How many hundreds of millions of dollars has CNN paid out and Fox News paid out for all of their crap, journalism? Uh, it's, I think, yeah, I don't think our system really supports public shaming, but there is something to be said about that. Pirates used to be publicly branded, right? Back
Yeah.
in the day. So
Yeah.
they used to, so it's not something that we haven't done in the past. But then it's interesting because that kind of, you think about pirates today, it's this culture that is romanticized. You have Pirates of the
Right.
Caribbean, right?
Right.
So I don't know what the public shaming would do. I think for a fair amount of people who like have some self-respect, I think it's probably a good tool. For people who've already told the world to go fuck themselves and are morally bankrupt, I don't think it's going to matter at all. They'll wear it with pride and form a culture around it.
Yeah. I mean, we have all these titles like doctor, PhD,
Thief.
deacon. Yeah. Like you know, and with those titles come perks. With those
Right.
titles come respect. So we have like the opposite of it. We have not shaming, but like uplifting. What if
Acknowledgement.
there was a acknowledgement? Hey, I'd like a table for two for Dr. Monty. Or you know what if there was a acronym or some titles for the lessers among us, like these are the pros over here, and in a way, the people at the banks or these people stealing money are just modern day pirates, and
Yeah.
so maybe we should be looking back. When like you had mentioned this a while back in a previous podcast that you got to save the game somewhere. When things get tough, you go back to the spot where you started, or you go back to the spot before you died. I think as the world is changing, and as we are getting to this new world order today, they are kind of like modern pirates. And maybe as as history doesn't, but it rhymes. Maybe we can be looking back at history at some ideas we used to penalize people in the past and reapply them today. It doesn't have to be the same way, but it could be some use of that model. Like you had mentioned that you got to save the game. We go back to spots where before we died, and we start over there. And if we look at today's thieves, be it Jeffrey Epstein or Harvey Weinstein or even the guy in my community, they can be looked at as pirates. They have come in and they have stolen all the wealth from working people. They've marauded. They have done things that are borderline crimes against humanity. And I think that they could be penalized in ways in the past that may not be as barbaric, but may hold enough weight to cause the world to look at them in a way as pirates should be looked at, and that's a negative way.
Yeah, but I don't know that you're going to get that response because just like we talked about the gatekeepers for like a spot for premiere on a podcast, those gatekeepers exist at all echelons of society. And
Yeah,
and a lot of the people who are these criminals, they're friends with those gatekeepers too.
yeah,
There's six people who own 90% of the media in the world, right? You don't think those six guys never get on a phone call together? I mean, come on. Let's have some realism in the world, right? Yeah. People don't like to think about that because, they don't like the idea of being controlled. And so we
yeah,
make all of these veneers and mechanisms to kind of, I hide the reality that people are controlled, that you only have a certain amount of options, that you don't have a say in that. It's not a negotiation. Uh, but for the people who are in those other echelons, it's a whole different animal, you know, and they have the ability to kind of slip the bounds of social order, if you will.
yeah, yeah. If we play that out a little bit, would you say that that is kind of what's happening right now in Europe? Is this some sort of pissing match? Like we're going to shut off your oil, we're going to shut off your electricity. We want you to do this. Is this the gatekeepers taking their ball and going home? Is that what? Can you see it that way, or how would you make sense of this really hyper focus on a nuclear war and Europe failing and the monetary system breaking in our world right now?
I, I think this is the culmination of a multi-generational plot, if for lack of a better word.
Right.
I think this is it's related to the Fed. It's related to the IMF. It's the central banking systems. This is a plan that has been instituted for a long time. What I think is kind of throwing a monkey wrench into the whole thing is what we're doing right now. People being able to talk on the internet. Because before, you could control the narrative. You're not getting any news in the town besides from the town crier. And then all of a sudden,
Right.
well, now we control the airwaves. So we have full, we control the broadcast. They lost control of the broadcast. And so I think in losing control of the broadcast, now we're seeing those death throes. We're seeing that need to hold on to power. And I think all of this is playing out at multiple levels, from regional to multinational levels. And I think that's where we're seeing a lot of this, the oil and everything in the breaking up of the euro and all of this. I think we're going to see the breaking of it. I don't think it's going to turn and go back the other direction. What about yourself?
Yeah, it's a great point, and you know, I I didn't realize how tightly controlled the media was because I felt like we were sort of the frog in the boiling pot. When I was little, you had 13 channels, and then you got cable, and then it seems like the big club started letting more and more people in because they had to.
Right.
But then it got to a point where the big club had players inside it that wanted to take over the club, and it's like it's like that movie Goodfellas when they make that big score at the airport, and the boss tells them, "All right, you fuckers." They're like, "Where's our cut? Where's our cut?" He's like, "No one's giving you fucking money. There's too much heat on us. Everybody got to calm down. Fucking let's just ice it for a year." They're like, "A year? What are you talking about?" And so he finally pays them out, and he goes, "Okay, look, I'm gonna pay you guys out, but nobody buys anything. Anybody fucking buys anything, they're dead."
Mm-hmm.
And the very next day they go to a party. One guy's got a fucking brand new Cadillac. The other girl's got a fur coat. He's like, "What the fuck is this? What is this? I told you guys not to buy anything." And so it's like the big club got too big, and
I think it got too
when
greedy.
yeah, and look, like let's be honest. When the boss dies, there's always chances for a takeover. The queen just died, and like we had talked about this earlier. Like there's when the leader dies, old scores are settled. There's a leader that can come in and say, "Hey, you two, knock it off. I'm fucking watching you dummies. No one fights here. I'm gonna kill both of you." Those guys will back off until that guy dies, and then like those guys never forgot. Families don't forget who killed their dad. Families don't forget who
That's right.
killed their cousin.
Mm-hmm.
Families don't forget who fucked their sister. Like those scores are being settled. And like look at Russia and Brussels. Like those how long have those are just different divisions of families. All those over there
Oh
are
yeah.
just different cousins and stuff, right?
Yep. Yep.
They have so much family feud. Like old scores are being settled, old toys are being taken back. And I agree. I think that this genie doesn't go back in the bottle. And I think our best hope is for America to not be sucked into that shit over there. Like we always get sucked in to go and clean everything up. On some levels, I see one of our strategies as, hey, let's feed these guys the weapons. Just feed them the fucking weapons, let them kill themselves, and when they blow themselves up, then we will be in the same position we were after World War II. We will be the Reconstructionists. And I see, like, when I look at it from that angle, like at first I got mad. Like, why are we sending $700 billion over there? Why are we sending billions of dollars? And I think the answer to that is because we stand to make 700 trillion on the backside. Yeah, nobody likes it. We don't want to talk about it, but everyone's going to benefit from. Let Europe kill themselves, turn off all their oil, cut all their shit, and we're probably playing both sides. We're
Of course we
probably
are.
cutting pipelines,
Yeah.
and I don't know. Like when I look at it from that angle, that's probably a way better option than us sending people over there. Even though we have people over there now, it's better than setting up a draft and sending real Americans to go die over there. I think that's kind of at least one of our official positions as what's left of our nation state to do. So that's kind of how I see it over there.
I think think you're giving a little bit too much altruism to it. I really
You're probably
do.
right.
I really do. I see that playing out that way, but I see
Right.
the foundation of it being, hey, we got a whole bunch of weapons that we've already bought and paid for. If we move 700 billion of them, we can build another 1.7 trillion of them on the back end.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah. Yeah.
I do think that there is other people playing a longer game. To your point is, oh, we can come be the reconstructionists, and this. There's the old saying, "Smart money plays both sides," right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And so I think smart money is playing both sides. It always has. So I think we're definitely probably playing both sides as well.
Yeah. I mean, if I go to the track, I'm probably gonna box them 1 in the 4 horse because I like them. You know what I mean? Whatever one wins, I might like that 1 horse better, but if I just box them, fuck, I'm probably gonna win. And
Mm-hmm.
but that's the thing. That's the thing about life. That's the thing about gambling. That's the thing about greed.
Mm-hmm.
Is that sometimes that long shot comes in.
It
Sometimes this
does.
thing you thought was a donkey, dude, that thing just fucking it becomes the new flight line. Just wham! It fucking runs through everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And that you hear it all the time. Anything can happen when you let slip the dogs of war. And
Indeed.
you know, imagine having you and your 4 oligarch friends, and you control 60% of the resources. You're looking at the board like, we got this, man. What the fuck are these people gonna do? They're not gonna do shit. But that's when things happen, and that's when things can turn bad. And even if it's a ruse, even if they have already made the peace deal and they're just using this idea of nuclear war to scare everybody to send more money over there so they can build up the Azovstal fucking steel mill, they can put condos on the Black Sea, they put a new pipeline from fucking Israel all the way through. Even if they're just using the thought of nuclear war to scare everybody and rile them up so they can do the old Kissinger plan of escalate before you de-escalate, you better be fucking careful because I mean, that's kind of what Hitler was supposed to just be the front guy that ran over everybody for fucking Britain, but he's like, you know what, fuck these guys, I'll just do it myself. There's people that will stand up and throw a big giant monkey wrench in your whole plans, and all this talk about nuclear war, like, people should be real careful. Like, if you look at Putin, whether he's in on it or not, like, dude, he is getting older. Like, there's a real chance that guy might want to settle a score with the crown prince who became king recently. He might have always hated that guy. And if you listen to his rhetoric, like, you know, and I don't know because I don't speak Russian, but I try to listen to some of the interpretations. And I listen to Lavrov, and he's been really clear. Like, as much as we want to make it about the U.S. and Russia, like, that guy hates Britain more than anything. And he has said on multiple occasions, if we were to go to a nuclear war, I'm going to attack the real culprits. And I don't think he's talking to me. I don't think he's talking to the American people, but he has called out Israel. He has called out the British fucking royal family. He said, look, I know where you live. And if I'm going down, you guys are coming with me. And look, I gotta just think about the Russian people you know. Think about the who's the kid that beat if you watch the UFC, there was the kid from the guy that beat Conor McGregor. He was from the Russian.
Habib.
What was that guy's name? Habib, right?
Nurmagomedov. Yeah.
Though the Russian people, the people from the Eastern Bloc, you know, they are a different breed of toughness. They have never had the luxuries that people in the West have had. They have fought for fucking everything, and so have their parents, and so have their parents, and so have their parents. And like, they ain't fucking around, man. Those guys they're built different, and they have a different mentality. And I think that they have a different level of fairness where they come to you and say, listen, I'm done playing. The next time you do this, I am going to hurt you. And that's what I get from that side of the world. When I hear Putin talk, like, that guy's been really patient. And I'm not saying one side's right or one side's wrong, but I am saying that guy's not fucking around. And I honestly think that guy sees himself as a savior of morality when he's talking about, kids getting.
Yeah, he thinks his a lot of his rhetoric is we're going to kill the Nazis. right? We're going to
Yes.
kill these people who are anti-Christian. Who are, that's a lot of what comes out of there. Uh, which, you know, it, whatever it is, right? But
Right. Right.
if you look at the history of rhetoric like that, that launches crusades.
Yes.
That launches these things that are almost feasible, and then all of a sudden they become our reality really fast. Um, so, and, I don't think that it's all a puppet show. Like, to your point, the Russians I know are very serious dudes. And
Yeah. Me too.
they're happy-go-lucky until they're really not, and then when they're not, man, it's a problem.
You could say that for all white people. White people are really nice until they're not.
I think
You know what I
I think
mean?
that's all people in general, right?
I think so too. Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, what the fuck are we protecting Nazis for? Like, what the fuck are we doing? Like,
But
why? Why?
and declared Nazis. It's not like it's a false accusation, right? I think the
Right.
Nazi Party won one of their elections in one of those subregions.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a real thing. And then all of a sudden, well, it's also fascinating if you look back at the news cycle, right? If you go back to just like 2016, Ukraine is the most corrupt state on the planet. It's, they have nothing but problems. It's something that we need to deal with. All this stuff about Ukraine being horrible and terrible and all the corruption that's going on there. Fast forward 5 years, and now everybody has a Ukraine flag on their social media account.
Okay, I'll take it even one step further. Like, look, just look. Everybody with a Ukrainian flag on their picture or whatever, those people are supporting Nazis. Hands down, without a doubt. You have a Ukrainian flag, you're supporting Nazis. That's a fact. I'm not trying to be rude or disrespectful to anybody who cares about Ukrainian people. I care about all the people in all the countries. But here's a fact. If you have a Ukrainian flag, you are supporting Nazis. Now, guess what? History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. The same people that are supporting Nazis today are the very same people that supported Nazis in World War II. Now, I want people just to take a minute to think about that. Like, what? You know why they're? Because they never stopped supporting them. And now here's another fucking crazy thing. What are the last four words of Ashkenazi? What are the last four letters of Ashkenazi?
Awesome.
Dude, I'm just saying. I'm just saying. Like, I if you look into the history, God, I probably shouldn't talk about this, but like, how can you not? Like, the
Sure. Yeah.
people in this region, did the Russians know? The Russians had like how many million? Do they have millions of people or 500,000 people killed by Nazis? Like,
There was
they
millions.
know the history, they know what's happening there, and for us to not even take a step back and go, wait a minute, these people have a fucking Nazi flag. We were taught our whole life the Nazis are horrible people. Like, why are we supporting them? Like, how can you fucking see that and be I'm on their side? No, what are you doing? And then you start looking at, oh well, there's a pipeline that wants to come right through the Middle East and it wants to come right through Israel, come right up to this area and support all of fucking Europe. Wow, it's almost like that these people have always been the shock troops of these other people. Like,
Sure.
you know, okay, I'm a fucking truck driver in Hawaii, and I know that. Like, everybody, like, most people, I gotta think that go to college. If you're a professor, how many liberal people in colleges are supporting fucking Nazis right now? Like, it blows my mind because I start thinking, this is exactly how it was in World War II. Before the Nazis were horrible fucking killers and experimenters on people, they were loved. People in our country loved the Nazis, man. They loved
Yeah.
them. They wanted to be like them. Like, they learned so much shit from us. And now you know what's coming out now is like, look at all this medical experimentation that's been happening. Whether it's inoculations or whether it's asbestos being pumped into prisoners, you know, like that never stopped.
No,
That
it
never
hasn't.
stopped, and it was
No.
happening. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like I see it happening. It is I see. Maybe it never stopped happening, and I'm just now noticing it. Maybe that's what it is. But it seems to me that the very same circumstances that caused World War II are the very same circumstances we are finding ourselves in now. And my only thing I have to say is that we as Americans must not get sucked into a ground war over there. We must not send people there. We must pretend we're Switzerland and stay neutral. I don't care if we ship them weapons. Let's ship both sides weapons. Okay, let's just become the new Knights of the Templar and just play both sides, send them all weapons and do our own thing over here and work on the Monroe. Let's just be our own hemisphere over here. But like I can see that happening over there. And what happens when the lights get shut off? What happens when like Europe is going to collapse? They're collapsing right now. The euro's done. Germany's going to rise up because it's the only real power over there.
Yeah. And it's
Yeah.
the only industrial center over there.
Yeah.
They basically they floated the euro for the past 15 years, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, this has never stopped. Like so a lot of people think World War II it all ended and blah 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 blah, but nothing stopped. Not even the research stopped. You're familiar with Project Paperclip, and for those who aren't, Project Paperclip was we brought over a whole bunch of Nazi scientists. We split them with the Soviets, and they took half and we took half, and we continued every single one of those programs that those scientists were working on. Every single one. And so this game has been a perpetual game that hasn't stopped, and we don't get to see the inner machinations, the inner workings of it. As just commoners, we're not purview to these types of things, but you can see the echoes of it. In the multinational deals and the NGOs, and where we're trying to move, like this climate deal, or how the International Monetary Fund now seems to dictate the policy for the world. This game has been perpetually being played. Back to our point before of the Fed being established. This is the extension of that game. This is that game still being played over 100 years later, and the board's now just coming to a really interesting strategic kind of kerfluffle. And I think I agree. We don't need to see a ground war with anybody. But I don't think that America comes out of this hunky-dory. I don't think it's like a World War II. Because
Go
ahead. No, go ahead.
I've heard some leaders say things like, sometimes countries have to be bombed into going to war.
Right.
And I think that there's a real chance, I think there's a real chance of it won't be a nuclear bomb, but it'll be called a nuclear bomb. And I think there's a real chance of an attack, probably in Texas or somewhere in the United States, and it's blamed on Russia. I think that you're going to see an attempt to get America into the world. If you look at all that, they've all been fucking false flags to get us into those wars.
Right.
And the only way to get America into another war is to bomb our country on our soil.
Right. And sadly, most all of those have been false flags. I mean, minus probably Japan actually showing up in Pearl Harbor.
Right.
I don't think that's too much of a false flag, though the motivations behind that are very interesting.
Yeah, and you had the Gulf of Tonkin that was, prior to that. And then
you have the Bay of Pigs, which Kennedy didn't do. You have, we know that this is standard operating procedure for the people who pull strings.
Yeah. And like, isn't it interesting that there's been a slew of CIA guys and FBI guys that have just went ahead and quit? I think it's that these guys were told, hey, we need you to do this. Like, that's a bridge too far. You know what? I love my country, and you can tell me whatever you want, but I'm not doing that. And on some level, I think, like we were talking earlier, I think in a lot of these agencies, like there's so many good Americans, man, like in the CIA, the FBI, like, there's really great people that are the best of the best that signed up for what they did because they love this country, and they follow orders to a point. But the best of the best are not going to go out and physically do something that they know will ruin the very country they signed up to protect. I believe that wholeheartedly. And I think that that's where we're at. I think people are coming to those guys with suitcases full of money, like, hey, we need you to do this. And they're like, sorry, man, I can't do it. You
Sure.
know, yeah, I believe that. And I think that's one reason why they want to get away from nation states is people have love of country still. And, you know, even Eric Prince, like, that guy's probably on par with, like, some of the greatest generals of all times, you know, whether it's Hannibal or Scipius or all these people. But he's got his own mercenary group. I
Mhm.
don't know. I don't know that Eric Prince would. I think he would protect corporations, but I don't think that he would have his people bomb our country. I don't think he would. But you know, but that's where you got to go to. You got to go to some mercenary somewhere to get it done.
Yeah, it's well, and I think that's in part of the plan, right? We've seen the privatization
Yes.
of all industries across the
Yeah.
board, and
Right.
security is the last one standing, really. And you know, from from the Iraq, from the Afghanistan, the rise of BlackRock, or all of these mercenary companies. Now they're funded to the tunes of billions of dollars, with soldiers,
Yeah.
with soldiers in six continents all across the world. It's wild stuff. And so I think, and to the point of the Democrats who say that that they don't want anybody having guns, but they're happy with armed security around them 24/7 with all the guns in the world.
Yeah.
You know, I think we are seeing the privatization of the military, and I think the woke stuff that's kind of going through the military now, that and the numbers being down on recruitment and all these things. I think we're kind of seeing it work. It's effective.
Yeah. You know, I was just thinking. A few years ago, there was a really good article in Rolling Stone about uh, I forgot who it was, but they were embedded with General McChrystal, and that's when like, it was a really for anybody listening. I think you should try to go on like eBay but I'm gonna try to go on there and buy that issue. I think that there's a lot of it's always interesting if you can have an issue of an article that was written that took down a general. You know, I think that harkens back to like Agent Hunter Thompson and stuff. However, you know that was the first time I began noticing that we were getting rid of people in the military that were you know that were a threat in some ways, not to us, but you
to
know
the
if you
to an authority power structure. Because the military
yes
was kind of
yes
its own thing. You had the commander in chief, but
yes
that was the only kind of crossover between the things. Now all of a sudden, the military is much more beholden to all these different factors, right? Which never existed before by design,
yeah
right? Because you don't want your military subjected to propaganda. That's where you end up with bad morale and a whole bunch of problems. Uh,
yeah.
so I agree. I think the people who posed a threat to that emerging kind of power structure were systemically removed.
You know, it's interesting on the topic of that. Do you know that there's a like a carrier squadron, and I forgot which one it is, but it's in control of a French general. Like there's a French contingent
Hmm.
that controls a whole squadron, like a destroyers, aircraft
Really?
carrier.
I,
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
it was given to them. Yeah, people can look it up, and I think that that is the plan. That you can see all of our stuff being farmed out. Like, why would we let another country's general be in control of one of our aircraft carriers in the entire strike group? Like, that's fucking treason. Like, that should not be happening. There's another set of things that are happening. I think in New York and California, there are two municipal Chinese police
Oh,
departments
I
that have
saw
come
that.
in.
Yeah.
Yeah, what
Like
the fuck is that?
we're just gonna start a police department.
Like, why should a police department from China be able to come to the United States
And
and
set up
fucking
shop.
start rounding people up or write me a ticket, dude? I'll punch that fucker in the face. Dude, what are you talking? You don't tell me what to do. I tell you what to do. You know, if you can see, that's the slow rollout of the global agenda. Like
Right.
when you start allowing other countries to come in here and start making the rules, and isn't it interesting that those things are happening in the states that are already kind of anti-American? You know, they're already part of this new global order. And the truth is, I don't know. Is a global order better? Does it have more
Well,
peace? Maybe. I don't know, but
you know,
I don't.
I think that's something that gets glazed over in a lot of these conversations. People say, "Oh, it's the
Right.
new world order, it's the global order, it's blah 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 blah." Well, there is a reality to the situation that we all are on the same rock hurling through space,
Yes. Yeah.
and we have existential threats that exist beyond us just blowing ourselves off this rock. Um, and so there is something to be said about cooperation at a global scale. And
Right.
and I think the idea of nation states were kind of formed under the premise of war, right? The whole idea behind even if it was based in a monarchy, but the whole idea behind a nation state or even a city state was that there was you needed that organization to defend yourself, if not outright wage war. And I think when you have that kind of impetus, when you kind of have that underlying foundation, just like we've talked a lot about how underlying structure kind of, will change what emerges on a larger level. When you have this underlying structure of we're here to shoot people, what does that say when you try to get together at a larger scale? So it's something that it should be a topic of conversation. What I see the real problem is the only people who are using or who are talking about it are the people who already have all the power anyway. And those are the last
Yeah.
people. And those are the last people that you want talking about this. Which is
Right.
so. I think there's when we start to just blanket these things out, I think that we lose a lot of the conversation. There is a conversation to be had about us all living on this same rock, but it shouldn't be had under the guise of nuclear war, um, threats to sovereignty, all of these other things. It should be under the guise of, hey, we all acknowledge that we live on this rock. Let's go have a conversation about this, a transparent one in front of the public, one that's, not just behind closed doors and people, glad handing and shaking, smoking cigars, because that's what's happening in today's world.
Yeah, I agree. I when I look at it from that angle, like if I was going to steel man it and say we all live on this rock, and we should live in a world where we can trade together and we can live together, and we should try to make the world better for everybody. And the problem I see is that under the guise of nation states or their globalism or whatever, they're still carving up territory. Like the people in power haven't changed,
Right.
and I can see how they. I could see the beautiful idea of look, we need to work together to have one set of sacrifices and goals and work together as a planet. Like, who doesn't want that?
Yeah.
But the problem is the people that are in positions of authority, they may claim that, but that's not their intent. At least
Exactly.
that's not what they're showing. They're carving up all the resources for themselves, they're carving up all parts of the planet, and they're moving in their partners from different parts of the world. And if there's corruption in your community, at least you can go to the people in authority in your community and complain. If the people that are in charge of your community live on a different continent, then the level of corruption is going to be 100 times what it is now.
Right. It's kind of the same idea why whenever they bring up National Guard, if they're doing anything serious in countries, they bring people from different states, right, to go
Right.
patrol other states because
Right.
they're
Right.
not they're not gonna shoot their brother, but they'll happily shoot
That's
some
right.
random stranger.
That's
Well,
right.
maybe not happily, but less adversely. And so, yeah, I think it's who's in charge, right? Who's pulling the strings here? Like,
Yeah.
because if we're all out for the people and it's humanity out for humanity, I'm on board.
Me too.
If it's the same scumbags who are pulling the strings right now, I got big problems.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm rebelling on every level at that age or at that particular juncture. And I guess maybe in some ways the same way if you're driving. They say if you're driving a race car, don't focus on stuff outside the track because you gravitate towards what you focus on. And if you think you're gonna crash, you focus on the pole, you're probably gonna hit that pole. So on some level, it's really easy to see the corruption. It's really easy to see the negative things that are being thrust upon us on a daily. but maybe it's best to focus. I mean, you should keep an eye on it and you should
Right.
look at it. But I think what we're doing as far as trying to create a better network and help people and create a better lifestyle for yourself, your family, and those people you care about is probably the best thing you can do right now, regardless of
Absolutely.
what happens in Europe or what happens in your community or what happens in your country. You can control what happens in your life, and you can look at your life in a way that will shape it up, and you can make plans to make yourself better, and you can go and learn more and participate more and volunteer more. And I think if you do that, then you begin to not only grow as a person, but you grow your community, and you begin to find these solutions to answers, at least locally.
Right. And I think that is the only really real solution, or
Right.
at least attainable solution for us as the common individual.
Yeah.
It has to be focused locally, especially focus on community. Go ask your neighbor for a cup of sugar. When's the last
Yeah.
time that happened? For instance, my neighborhood right here. I know my neighbors. I don't talk to any of them. And it wasn't an overt choice. It was just moving, moving, moving. Everybody's going, 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 and you wave to them when they go down the street. That's about it, type thing. Whereas, if you actually were to sit down and have a conversation with those people, now instead of we kind of did a shitty version of this with the neighborhood app, right?
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is kind of funny. I think cracks me up. That thing's like a never-ending stream of gossip. But we can, if we focus on community, to your point, we can, that's how we find the solutions. That's how we solve the problems, because you solve the
Yeah.
problem locally first. You solve the root cause. You solve the most foundational piece of the problems first, and then you move up and you iterate out. And the top down stuff that we have being thrust upon us, it's not going to work.
Yeah. I agree. I agree. Man, I have an absolute blast talking to you, my
Yeah,
friend.
you
I
too,
gotta
brother.
let to land this plane a little bit and go start the next part of the next chapter here.
Well,
So,
you brought it back to the ground pretty well with your last statement there, sir. You took us from the heights and brought us back to earth.
well, it was a fun trip. I really enjoy. I enjoy the process, and I enjoy talking to great people, and I feel like I get to learn more about my own thoughts, and I feel as if I come away with a better understanding whenever I talk to you, my friend. So thank you for the platform and the opportunity to get to be here today.
Likewise, brother. Shout out anything you want to shout out.
Got a good podcast coming tomorrow. I think everybody's going to like it. Um, I have an interesting author coming up, David Walton, who's wrote a really good book called The Genius Play, and he's got a new book out called Living Memory that it's really wild. It's a wild ride. I think people are going to enjoy it. And if anybody wants to reach out to me, you can find me on the True Life Podcast, or my email is georgepmonty@gmail.com. Send me a line. I'll get back to you. And thank you for having me here today. And thank you to everybody who's listening. I hope you have a beautiful day, and I hope you realize how beautiful you are as a person on the inside, and try to make somebody smile today.
Wise words from the one and only George Monty, folks. I think I'll drop it there. Check out benjamincgeorge.com for any updates, and we'll catch you next time.
All right.